The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions, and behavior loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. In order for you to perceive your own ego, you must understand that the ego is a pattern of energy, and it is resistance to what is. Its entire mission is to dislike one's own experience and try to control it and morph it and shift it into something else. That's why addictions and unsatisfaction and all psychologically negative qualia like boredom or anxiety or depression or overthinking all relate back to the ego, because it's always the identity of who you are that creates all of these different symptoms that try to manage your own experience. The ego is the social survival mechanism that has evolved in order to be viewed favorably socially, in order to be seen as something that has the ability to control one's own environment. The ego always exists in relationship to other people. It is always trying to manage how you're being perceived by others, how you're being judged by others. It's trying to avoid emotions of shame and guilt, and it is basically an engine there to make you unhappy. Because as long as the ego believes it is real and it exists, it can create a distinction between you and other people. Now, when I say distinction between you and other people, I mean hierarchically. I mean that you can put yourself into a societal hierarchy where you're either above others or below others. And wherever you position yourself, you try to find comfort in there and not push up or down the hierarchy. That's why limiting beliefs, for example, believing that your own business endeavors, for example, are locked out and you cannot make more money than you're making right now, or you cannot become more creative than you are right now, or you will forever be fat and not lose weight, or you are just the addict that will never stop its addiction. Whatever the identity constructs itself around then feels like a solid identity that believes it cannot die. Change is so difficult because it requires the deconstruction of this mechanism, and in a way it requires a small death. That's why the ego is the social survival mechanism. But social is not just through other people, it becomes how you interact with yourself, your own self-relationship, how you think about your own thoughts, which is, a sort of meta way of thinking. If this sounds interesting to you, check out my video, Thinking About Thinking, that I did like a long while back. It might actually be relevant here. Because you have different layers of evolution that have morphed, how the ego has changed over time. And depending on in which quadrant you fall, your ego might be more or less developed. But I go way more in depth in this Thinking About Thinking video. The entire survival history of the ego is basically this need to reject the painful nature of its own existence. Because we are spawned into this life without conscious choice, at least we don't remember having made a choice about it. And now we are confronted with all of this pain and we kind of want to manage it, right? But socially, we have been conditioned to manage it in a way that is accepted by others. So you basically adapt defense mechanisms that then become your personality, which try to survive in your environment. So if you had very abusive parents, for example, then you might have learned that being open and vulnerable is something that is going to be punished. So now you're an adult, and now you cannot share openly or be vulnerable with your emotions because you've been trained that this is weakness. So now your ego architecture has been built to resist, vulnerability, for example. And it can have a lot of detail and nuance to what it is resisting. And oftentimes, whatever you're resisting is so enmeshed in your own identity that you're not aware that you're resisting it, or you think that whatever you're resisting is just objectively necessary to resist. I remember, for example, that I had a friend that was very scared of death, and he was very convinced that death is just like the worst thing possible. And then when I talked about like a more positive view of death as like some natural life cycle of all things, then I could always feel like his pushback and be like, yeah, but we are living organisms, we don't want to die, and this is why death is so scary and death is so awful. And then at some point, he, told me about somebody in his family that died and the bad consequences that it had. And then it became very obvious for us in this conversation that his view about death wasn't more right or wrong than mine, and my view about death wasn't more right and wrong than his, but it was just the way that we have learned through our life circumstances to relate to this stuff. And although I've also been confronted with death in my life, of course, also when I had this conversation with him, but it was different, right? It wasn't the same. Also, I'm not the same person. I have other genetics, other circumstances. Like, there's so much that comes into play in how your ego builds itself out. And another way the ego tries to cope with all of this stuff is a lot through productivity. Like a lot of, very successful people that find a way to cope with all of this pain, cope with it through workaholism and being hyper productive. A lot of people who are coming to my ego architectures actually are people who own businesses or run some sort of slight side gig or have creative endeavors and try to be somebody and are ambitioned. And for some of them, it is just something they enjoy doing and it's part of their compassion. But for some others, you can feel it is part of the entire machinery that really doesn't want to feel the weight of its own experience. And when you then have some awakening experience, Kundalini awakening, whatever you want to call it, then the wall that is trying to protect you through all of these defense mechanisms basically gets crumbled, and then all of the emotions flow through, and then people are very scared of losing their drive, because likely they are losing that drive because they don't really know how to engage with it. And then there's also this belief that if you truly follow non-dual spirituality or follow psychological integration, that you're going to lose whatever put you into this successful place in the first place, which is wrong. the beauty of it, although you might be unstable for a while, that's true, but the beauty of it is that at the end of this psychological process, you are way more driven to live your life the way you want to. You are free to do now whatever you want to do, and you're not just purely driven by your trauma. This being driven by your trauma thing is actually super, super common among very successful, ambitious people and entrepreneurs. I know that I think one of the most popular one on YouTube is Alex Hormozy, and he's very open about the fact that, he just basically abdicated his happiness, and all of his fuel was basically driven by, suffering, which suffering is a great fuel, right? Like if you really want to get something done to punish yourself, if you don't get it done, works wonders. The ego loves this. It's perfect. Except you can also get way further while having a good time. And who doesn't want to do that, right? It's way more pleasant to be successful, have impact in this world, and not have to suffer through it. It's only the ego that believes that, success requires suffering. The ego, in fact, believes that existence requires suffering. And that's only the case because, it is suffering. It is resistance. It is not wanting to be what is, but wanting to be something else, conditioned through its social environment. Because in your pure natural state, like just being in the state of pure aliveness, then the organism doesn't really want to do much but to eat, procreate, have like a safe roof on top of his head, or like, water, and some nice social life. And then it's basically done, right? It is successfully being alive. But we humans have all of this baggage of societal expectations and what we are supposed to be and what is the meaning of our life and how can we be the hero of our hero's journey and stuff like this. And all of this is kind of psychological illness. It is all illusory. It's illness to the extent to which you're suffering from it, right? If it is the drive forcing you through your own life. Because, it's just really not necessary. If you want to be happy, chasing $1 billion is not going to work. And I know I'm not saying something super novel here. Everybody kind of knows this. And still, we are all driven by this desire for success and this sense that we are somehow failing somewhere. We don't know where or how, but we are failing in the eyes of something. And it is this failing that is, again, a sense of shame and sense of inadequacy that just doesn't like its own experience and tries to fix it somehow and seek somewhere some ultimate solution. For philosophers, it's to find out the nature of reality. Now, I'm not saying that all of this is useless. And the beauty about all of this stuff is that success is still a positive thing, right? It can enrich your life. It can enrich yourself. But if you think that it's going to make you happy, then you are having a misunderstanding about how this thing functions. And how this thing functions is purely on the basis of your own psychological relationship with yourself. It's all based on identity. Clean up your identity misconceptions and you'll live freely. You'll do what you want to do. You will be driven toward authentic expression, like not having to manage how others perceive you. You won't care about judgment, but you also won't be afraid of judgment. It makes things natural. You have to introspect in a very counterintuitive way, because it isn't just enough that the ego is this ball of defense mechanisms. It is actually a professional liar. It lies to you all the time and tries to convince you of stuff that is just wrong, just so it can maintain its solidity and maintain its structure. You have probably in your own life, I wanted to give the example of an addict, but we are all addicts in something. So in your own life, you probably notice that you try to reduce something. You want to use less social media. You want to consume less junk food. You want to take less substances, whatever it is, right? And then something is pushing you into not doing what you think you actually want. Now, it is there where this friction happens, because you might want to start to live healthier, but you have this identity that says, I am not a healthy person. So now, to push against this identity is extremely difficult, because this identity is pushing in the opposite direction. And this is what everybody is struggling with all the time. And to see whatever belief systems are underneath requires either a lot of introspection or a teacher. And this is why spiritual teachers exist and why I do the job that I do. This is why the ego architecture audit that I provide is genuinely useful for people, because you are blind to your own illusions. And the only way this works is if you're somebody who genuinely wants to figure out what is true, who genuinely wants to understand oneself, and genuinely wants to come in sincere contact with, just what it is that you want to be. And if you are still kind of stuck, for example, you don't want to beat yourself up anymore for not being as successful as you are. You might say then that, I really don't want to beat myself up anymore. I really want to just be content even though I'm not super successful or whatever. You might say that then, right? Because you want to believe that this is true. This is the direction you want to move towards. But then all there all actions point to the contrary. And the fact that all actions point to the contrary is the sign that deep down, no, you actually don't want this. You're clinging to your defense mechanisms, and you're not admitting to the extent or in which way you are clinging to these defense mechanisms. And this is what you can see all the time. And you notice too when you talk to other people, just if you are averagely socially intelligent, you can see how everybody is in denial about stuff all the time. People lie to themselves time and time again. Every day people are lying to themselves. Because if they were to admit who they really are, if they were to look and see who they really are, then change becomes inevitable. If you see that what you're doing is making you more miserable and less successful, then why are you doing it? The only way you can look at it and keep doing it is if you're in denial about it. Because if not, it's just a stupid mode of operation. And it's kind of also like this sunken cost fallacy. If you have a defense mechanism that protects you from vulnerability for other people, and because of this, the last 20 years of your love life has been stifled, and you have lost loving relationships with your partners because you haven't been present for them, because you couldn't be vulnerable enough, or whatever it may be. But then you go out of this relationship and convince yourself that it was actually their fault that the relationship broke apart. Now try 5 years later to look at yourself and be like, oh no, it was actually on me. No, you've probably reinforced this belief over many, many years. And now it's very difficult to go back. And this happens in all ways. Real spiritual transformation, real psychological transformation always requires the desire to want to be proven wrong. If you want to prove yourself wrong, you can deconstruct your own conditioning, because then you see that the conditionings that you have been running were not necessary at all.